All right. So, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Corey McCarty. I'm a Java web service developer. I deal with largely databases with Java sitting in front of them for whatever reason. Um, I was asked to talk today. I'm actually the basis of this came from a blog post that I put together a little while back, and JC really took to it. Title is Carpe Diem, or where I will eventually wind up being intentional in your daily activities. If I can get Mr. Lawrence to drop those links in the chat for me. If you want something that is more poured over and maybe a little easier to follow, a little better detailed, I have written out the posts on both my personal website and dev.to. Dev.to is a great community as well. I've got all my writing on both those places. So recently I just started a new role with a company called Juice Plus. This is after having worked for a contracting company for 5 years. Learned a lot in that time, and leaving the first tech job, been in it for 5 years. If you're anything like me, leaving something is always kind of a time of reflection, especially having it happen under COVID like this. Not getting to go have farewell lunch with my old team or meet my new team. It's almost slightly depressive kind of thing. It's very, there's a lot of nostalgia. So in reflecting, I started looking back. Obviously, I know I've grown a lot in 5 years, and there's a lot of talk as far as getting what you can from any resource that you can find it. Your growth from any situation that you're in is always something that we're conscious of. However, after talking with Mr. Steve Hallman on the Slack a lot, I really started thinking about myself as a brand and as a product. And ultimately, when you're sitting in an interview and when you're writing your resume, you are the product. And the way that you make yourself a better product is you really need to figure out ways to add value, not just to yourself, but to your company, to whoever is paying you. You need to be doing what you can so that you can better them as well as them bettering you. So kind of walk through a little bit of my history. So my very first project I got put on was Enterprise Fraud Web Service. We took this Java jar file that was, it's just a really, really, really teeny tiny library that was put out to clients to use, and standing it up as a Java web service with a SOAP front end so that people can make requests back and forth to it. I was there for 6 months, and while I was the most junior person on the team, I was coordinating with one other on-site person and 3 offshore developers. And along with them, I was coordinating meetings with our client. Company I worked for used to be called Centel, now they've been bought by a company called Atos. And I was at FedEx, so I got to work there before I left with Coriano and Mr. Lawrence Lockhart. But so we were going through, what what is it that you need this thing to do? Because they're usually, when you tell somebody what you want, you tell a washed down part. It's the parts that you think are important, and it can be really difficult to get the parts that are actually important. Requirement elicitation really does come down to an art. Having been in, in restaurant industry and customer service and automotive maintenance, requirement elicitation, trying to draw out what somebody is trying to say, even though, they gave you something that, honestly really wasn't very helpful, right? Being able to get that information out and then be able to play with, I went through engineering school, so my head, I get into not visual design, but kind of the layout of how something should function, the utility of a thing, and break down the basics of that stuff. So looking back on this project, I helped to abstract the code in such a way that we're able to define. So basically the web service, what it did was it took a request from somebody that was registering, and we said, hey, I think you should take a risk, let this person register, or no, there's some information tied to this that looks bad. Let's not let them register. So we kind of maintained a list of attributes and allowed different types of attributes, and we're able to abstract it away to where we could have not just an approval request, but we could have different groups of applications that would have different sets of required fields that they had to pass in. And there's these different levels that our client, our InfoSec team, would ultimately have a secondary way to interact with our application so that they could define those things. Say that now we want to store IP addresses, or now we want to store, car tag numbers or driver's licenses or whatever it is that, being able to abstract it. In Java, you get into something called generics. It's, stepping back. I want this thing to be able to work for anything, right? Well, how do I do that? And being able to apply that stuff was able, I firmly believe, able to help that application make it to production in 6 months. And they're still running to this day without issues long term. And I was able to help expedite that and smooth the process along. And particularly dealing with on-site to offshore model work can be quite difficult in communication, especially when you have a client that's wanting to say, hey, go do this. And then, you need to make sure that everybody on your team is understanding. So being able to, not unique to on-site offshore, but definitely more difficult when people can't attend meetings. So after this meeting, I moved on to where I would be for 4 years. I came into this project. It was called Common Data Service. We stored XML files, and it got really ugly under the hood. Lots of abstraction, lots of genericness. But here I got to see the working of an enterprise level application that was already underway and had been in production for years. I got to learn lots about, we had lots of custom bash scripting, lots of, we had custom build process using Ant, and we had lots of internal and external dependent libraries, as well as rendering our own between our different secondary applications. So I got a lot out of that 4 years. I did support, and honestly, I let myself sit back and not realize what I was being given, and that being in a support-driven role, I had lots of downtime in between things. There'd be months when I couldn't think which way was up, but then there'd be months where I may have done 12 hours of work in those months. So it was really, it got to the point where I was really bored and annoyed with my situation. And then one day I just had a spark in talking with one of my coworkers that, you know, I can tinker with anything that I want. I started getting on Slack, and I started getting on Discord, and I started getting on, the Reddit programming communities, and trying to help people and learn things and build stuff, and started getting personal growth from that, lots of learning. But in all that time, in 4 years, I did probably 90% of the moves into production, at least usually one Saturday a month going and doing the work. But I was able to do the proactive work and making sure that any issues that started being problems before they were world stopping, I was able to help suggest things to our clients and keep them moving forward with as little impact as possible. And one of my coworkers and I were able to really form a close bond and start driving one another's. Same way that I see so many people doing in our Code Connector Slack that, it's, hey, I'm learning on this, or, I was playing with this thing, and, sharing links back and forth, talking about, we were both interviewing for jobs outside the company and looking for new places to go. And so being able to put back in that, maintaining the uptime, maintaining the responsiveness of the application, taking all of the things that they were teaching me and being able to provide value, take the extra initiative and help make sure that things are just being done as best as possible. Somebody told me one time, I wish I could remember who it was, say, if it wasn't for users that had issues with our software, we'd all be out of work, because they're the ones that come up with the, hey, well, what about this? Or, hey, I don't understand how to do this thing. Can you help me with this? If it wasn't for those things that we always think, initially that they're stupid, why can't they understand this? It's very straightforward interface. If it wasn't for them, we'd be out of work. So taking the time, this is what's feeding me. This is what's feeding my family. I need to be doing everything I can, right? I need to take the time and figure out what things need attention and what things I can help to provide. So after 4 years in that role, I spent my last year at that job working on, it was called Central View Management. Basically, if you ever hear the word hierarchy or hierarchical data, know that it's about to be really, really ugly. When you start storing trees of data in a database, it's bad. It just is. This particular application had been in production for about 5 years when I came on. Actually, when I came over here, I was able to bring my buddy, my coworker, her name was Abby. I brought her over from my last team to start getting her some more experience doing more things, because we had been kind of equally stuck with a very not shiny environment, with nothing new and not being able to write enough code to really hold our interests and make our resume look nice. So I brought her over, got her to come over with me, found something for her to do. And I got to do IT modernization and play with Jenkins pipelines and learn Groovy and CI/CD and the integration, the deployment, the testing, all that, all those nice pipeline things. That's awesome. Love that. Um, but that's all fun stuff that I got to do. I really enjoyed. So I looked around when I first landed in the team and realized that I knew less about the business logic, about the use cases of the software and how its data worked. I knew less about it than everybody there. All right, bottom rung. Been around for years, been through engineering school. I'm on the bottom. But then when we started doing this IT modernization stuff, it was, nobody else knew how to build these Jenkins pipelines. Nobody else knew how to do, we were doing new deployments to PCF instead of traditional PMs. And so when it came to that stuff, I knew as much as everybody else did. So I dug in and I became specialist there and was able to really build value in the fact that the people that knew the other things were able to work on the other things. And I was able to work on, on this stuff that not only was it stuff that I'm interested in, it's new shiny stuff, it's stuff that was cool on my resume. It's also stuff that probably wouldn't have gotten much attention. We'd have wound up trying to ask another team to help us build these things. And I was able to help build out things that made our devs' lives easier. And long term, I know that as long as that is in place, that I help to expedite that. I help to, make it work in a way that made sense for our team. And that adding value, I said the subtitle here, the being intentional with your daily activities. When we're looking at the things that we need to do on any given day or any given sprint or any given year or whatever it is, wherever you are, what are you doing to better yourself and to better your team? And looking back, I said I was the lowest one on the totem pole, but I actually landed with another guy named Jacob. He'd actually come into the team at the exact same time I did. He just transitioned from being an intern on another team to his very first job. And we both jumped into different things. Jacob and my buddy Barry, who was my lead developer, the three of us being the most senior, altogether newest in the industry, and myself stuck in the middle there, we just started feeding off of one another. Jacob, that guy knows more about front end than I've ever thought to consider. He was able to help. I had B-Rob got me started messing with my own website. Jacob was able to help, get me down the road, all kinds of design stuff. But that front end guy that was used to JavaScript and CSS and HTML and loves tinkering with that stuff, by the time I left, he was messing with Java web services. He was building things with Spring Boot. He was becoming a specialist that was being loaned out to other teams. My lead, while he knew lots and lots of, he came from a DBA background, he knew lots of stuff that I'd never known before and never heard of. But I looked up one day and he was calling me a bash guru because I was just spouting off command line, Linux command line things off the top of my head for, hey, well, just go run a grep across this, or, go, run this command here, do this when we were moving stuff around. And I didn't realize, I came from, when I was spending those 4 years with that one project, everybody had the same background, everybody had the same skills. And coming into this team showed me that there was value both in what I had and what everybody had. So in closing, I just like to challenge you. What are you doing on any given day? What are you doing to make yourself better, and what are you doing to make your environment better? And it really doesn't take much to make your environment better, to be a positive person in a group of people. If you want to read a better format of this talk, those links got dropped by Lawrence earlier, and that's all I got. I didn't get near technical as Coriano. I don't think anybody has any questions for me here, but I will. I'll surrender the floor. Thank you.